It was a cool evening in a small town, the kind of place where most people knew each other and where life usually passed by quietly. The streets were calm, with only a few cars moving along, and the shops were beginning to close for the night. For many families, it was just another ordinary evening. But for one police officer on duty, and for a woman struggling with her own troubles, it was a night that would change everything. The officer had been working long shifts for weeks. He was known around town as someone who took his job seriously, but also as someone who carried stress on his shoulders. Many who saw him in uniform believed he represented authority, order, and safety. To him, every call he answered was another responsibility, another chance to keep the peace. That night, just before midnight, a call came into the local police department. A woman had been seen leaving a neighborhood bar. She was unsteady, and a few people worried that she might cause harm to herself if she tried to get home on her own. She had been drinking, but more than that, she seemed upset and emotional. The officer responded quickly. His car pulled up near the street where the woman was walking, her steps uneven, her voice carrying into the night as she mumbled to herself. Some people nearby shook their heads in concern, while others simply passed by, unwilling to get involved. The woman was not a stranger to hardship. Life had not always been kind to her, and on that evening she had chosen the wrong way to deal with her pain. Alcohol had clouded her judgment, making her louder and less steady than usual. Yet beneath her stumbling steps and slurred words was someone who, like anyone else, just needed compassion and care. When the officer approached, the flashing lights of the patrol car reflected off the windows of nearby shops. He asked her to stop and talk to him, but she seemed too overwhelmed to respond clearly. Instead, she raised her voice and tried to walk away. He felt pressure to bring the situation under control, to follow procedure and prevent her from hurting herself or anyone else. After a short exchange, he decided to place her under arrest for her own safety and to calm the situation. She did not resist in a serious way, but she was confused and emotional. As he guided her toward the car, he placed handcuffs around her wrists, a routine step in such cases. In that moment, everything seemed standard. The officer had done what the law required. Onlookers expected the situation to end quietly, with the woman being taken to the station until she sobered up. But what happened next would shock the community. Instead of keeping calm and professional, the officer's patience slipped. Perhaps it was the stress of long hours. Perhaps it was his own frustration at dealing with another difficult call that night. Whatever the reason, he reacted poorly. Security cameras nearby and witnesses in the area caught the moment. The woman, already restrained and unable to move freely, became the target of the officer's unnecessary aggression. His actions went far beyond what anyone would consider acceptable. Those who saw it were stunned. Some gasped, others froze in disbelief. A few pulled out their phones, recording the scene, not quite believing what they were witnessing. In their eyes, the officer was supposed to be the one who stayed calm under pressure, the one who used his training to protect, not to lash out. The woman cried out, her words blurred by her state, but her fear was clear. She was no threat to him, no danger to anyone in that moment. Yet the trust that people usually place in a uniform was shattered in an instant. The quiet street, which just minutes before had seemed so ordinary, now carried an air of shock. People whispered to each other, unsure whether to step forward or to let the scene unfold. For many, there was a deep sense of helplessness. How could anyone stop what was happening when the person in uniform was the one causing it? By the time the patrol car drove away, the damage was already done not only to the woman but also to the image of fairness and safety that the community expected from its police officers. The recording devices kept running, and within hours, clips of the incident began to spread. First, it reached the friends of those who had filmed it. Then it moved onto social media platforms, where thousands of people could see what had happened with their own eyes. The town, known for its peaceful streets and friendly faces, suddenly found itself at the center of national attention. In the span of one night, a trusted officer's reputation was destroyed, a woman's dignity was shaken, and the community's faith in its protectors was challenged. At the station, the officer filed his report, describing the arrest in routine words. But he did not know yet how many eyes had already seen the truth. He could not have imagined the storm that was about to follow. The woman was placed in a holding cell, still confused and upset. She had no idea how far the consequences of that night would reach, nor that her painful experience would soon become the focus of headlines across the country. For now, the story was still just beginning. The night had ended with broken trust and unanswered questions. But in the days to come, the recordings, the witnesses, and the public's voice would turn one late-night arrest into a case that would test the very meaning of justice. And so, what began as a simple call about a troubled woman walking home would unravel into a story that no one in that town would ever forget. The following morning, the town woke up to whispers that quickly grew louder. People who had seen the late-night recording began sharing it with friends and family. By sunrise, what had happened was no longer a quiet incident, it was already moving through social media like wildfire. Phones buzzed with notifications, and conversations in cafes, grocery stores, and workplaces all circled back to one shocking topic: a police officer had mistreated a woman who was already restrained. In a town where most people trusted their local police, this came as a heavy blow. Many residents had grown up believing their officers were neighbors, mentors, and protectors. Parents had pointed to the uniform as a symbol of safety. Now, they were forced to ask themselves difficult questions. Could someone they trusted really act in a way that betrayed the badge? The video footage became impossible to ignore. It spread beyond the town within hours. Larger news outlets picked it up, replaying the images again and again, asking viewers to judge for themselves what they saw. The woman, whose name was not widely known at first, became the focus of compassion and concern. She looked small and powerless in the footage, and her condition that night, confused, tired, and unsteady, only made the public feel that she should have been treated with care. Across social media platforms, comments poured in. Some expressed disbelief: "This can't be real. Maybe there's more to the story." Others were angry: "How could this happen? She was already handcuffed." Still others shared their sadness: "I feel so sorry for her. She didn't deserve this." Local leaders quickly realized they could not remain silent. Within a day, the mayor held a press conference. Standing in front of cameras and a small crowd of reporters, the mayor promised a full review of the incident. His voice was steady, but behind his words was the same shock that the townspeople felt. He admitted that the footage was troubling and that trust had been broken. Community activists also raised their voices. They gathered in public spaces, holding signs that read "Justice for all" and "No one is above the law." Their message was simple: accountability must come first. People of every age came together, not out of anger alone but out of a shared need to protect the dignity of their community. For the woman at the center of the story, the days that followed were overwhelming. She had never imagined her face would be broadcast on television screens across the country. She was embarrassed by the situation, her night out, her drinking, her mistakes, but she also knew that the treatment she received was unfair. Friends and family stood by her, reminding her that she had done nothing to deserve what happened after she was restrained. In the meantime, the police department faced growing pressure. Reporters gathered outside, asking for comments, asking why an officer had been allowed to act in such a way. The chief of police looked tired when he finally stepped forward to speak. He announced that the officer involved had been placed on administrative leave while an investigation began. But for many, that wasn't enough. Placing someone on leave sounded like a temporary solution. People wanted clear answers: would there be charges? Would there be justice? The conversation went far beyond one town. Across the country, People debated the role of authority and the importance of accountability. Some pointed out that such incidents harmed the reputation of all officers, even the many who served with honesty and care. Others felt that this case revealed deeper problems that needed attention. Inside the town, the atmosphere changed. Ordinary errands turned into moments of discussion. At the supermarket checkout line, strangers shared their opinions. At the diner, regular customers debated the case over coffee. Parents at school drop-off talked in hushed tones, wondering what to tell their children about trusting the people in uniform. The woman herself was asked by close friends if she wanted to speak to the press. At first, she refused. She was exhausted, still trying to process what had happened. But as more and more people demanded her side of the story, she eventually agreed to share her feelings in a short interview. Sitting quietly in a living room chair, she told a local reporter, "I know I made mistakes that night. But I didn't deserve to be treated that way. I felt helpless. And I don't want anyone else to ever feel the same." Her words touched many hearts. She wasn't trying to make herself a hero or a victim, she was simply telling the truth of her experience. That honesty gave strength to the calls for justice. Meanwhile, national news channels began to cover the story more deeply. They interviewed experts on law enforcement who explained the responsibilities of officers during an arrest. They showed comparisons of proper procedures, reminding viewers that officers are trained to protect people even when they are under arrest. As the days turned into a week, public demonstrations grew larger. People gathered peacefully outside the courthouse, holding candles in the evening as a way of showing unity. They weren't just asking for punishment, they were asking for fairness, for the promise that the law would be the same for everyone. For the officer, life had changed dramatically as well. Once seen as a figure of authority, he now faced criticism at every turn. His name was in headlines, his photo appeared on television, and every step of his past career was being examined. Some of his colleagues were quiet, not knowing what to say, while others privately admitted they were disappointed by his actions. The community's trust in the police was shaken. Parents no longer felt entirely comfortable pointing to officers as examples of safety. Teenagers whispered about the case in school hallways. Local shop owners noticed that customers were more hesitant to greet officers warmly when they walked by. And yet, through all the pain, something important was happening. People were beginning to speak more openly about accountability, fairness, and respect. The incident had forced them to confront uncomfortable questions, but it also gave them a chance to demand something better. By the end of that week, it was clear that this case was not going to disappear quietly. The voices calling for justice were too loud, the evidence too visible, and the emotions too strong. What had started as a small-town incident had now grown into a test of integrity for the justice system itself. For the woman, each day still felt heavy, but she also felt a growing sense of support from people who believed her story mattered. For the officer, the weight of his decisions pressed harder with each passing day. And for the town, there was no going back to quiet, ordinary life not until answers were given, and not until justice was served. The days of public discussion slowly turned into weeks, and soon the case moved from conversations on the street to the serious halls of investigation. The police department could no longer handle the matter quietly inside its own walls. Too many eyes were watching, and too many people demanded transparency. The first step was an internal review. Officials began to examine the reports from that night. They compared what was written in the officer's paperwork with what was clearly visible on the video recordings. It did not take long to notice the differences. The report had been written in calm, routine language, describing the arrest as uneventful. But the footage told a very different story. The local prosecutor's office then stepped in. They received the evidence, reviewed the witness statements, and spoke directly with those who had been near the scene. Every detail was carefully recorded, every voice heard. Witnesses described their shock at seeing a woman, already restrained, being treated in a way that felt unnecessary and unfair. Some of them admitted that they had never seen anything like it before, especially from an officer they once respected. Meanwhile, the woman at the center of the case was asked to come forward to share her account officially. She was nervous. She had spent weeks avoiding the public eye, but now she was sitting across from investigators, retelling everything she remembered about that night. Her words were quiet, sometimes broken with pauses, but her story was clear. She admitted to being upset and confused that evening, but she also repeated that she had not posed any danger once she was restrained. As the investigation deepened, an unexpected truth emerged. This was not the first time the officer had faced complaints. Old files revealed that over the years, several small grievances had been reported against him. Nothing had ever been proven serious enough to remove him from duty, but now those earlier complaints seemed to paint a larger picture. Community members wondered aloud, if the warnings had been taken more seriously, could the recent incident have been avoided? The weight of public expectation grew even stronger. People wanted to know if the system would treat the officer fairly, or if his uniform would protect him from consequences. In town meetings, residents raised their voices respectfully but firmly, saying that accountability was not optional, it was a must. After weeks of review, the prosecutor made the announcement the town had been waiting for. The officer would be officially charged. The charges included misconduct and actions that went against his duties. It was a historic moment for the community, because rarely had one of their own officers faced such direct legal action. The announcement was made at a press conference. Cameras clicked, microphones pointed forward, and the prosecutor spoke with clarity. "We believe the evidence is strong, and we are moving forward with charges. The law applies equally to every citizen, regardless of profession or position." The words echoed across television screens and online news feeds. For many, it was a moment of relief. Justice, at least in process, was beginning. But it was not just relief that filled the air, it was also tension. Supporters of law enforcement worried about the message this case might send. Some said the officer's career had been long and filled with good service, and they believed one mistake should not erase all of it. Others disagreed, saying that the uniform carried great responsibility, and with responsibility came the highest expectations. The courtroom now became the center of attention. A date was set for the trial, and preparations began. Lawyers on both sides studied every second of video footage, every word of witness testimony, and every page of official reports. The community watched closely, waiting for the moment when the truth would be fully tested in court. For the woman, preparing to testify was not easy. She knew that once she stepped into the courtroom, her story would be examined from every angle. She would be asked difficult questions, her actions that night reviewed in detail. But she also knew that speaking up was necessary. She wanted the court to hear not just what had happened to her, but how it had made her feel. Her family supported her through it all. They reminded her that she was not alone. Friends visited, neighbors sent kind notes, and strangers wrote messages of encouragement. All of it gave her strength to face the days ahead. The officer, too, prepared in his own way. His defense attorney spoke publicly, suggesting that stress, long hours, and human error might explain his actions. The lawyer emphasized that his client had never before faced criminal charges and that he had served the community for years. Still, it was clear that the defense faced a difficult road. Outside of the courtroom, community groups held peaceful gatherings. They did not shout or point fingers, instead, they held discussions about how to make policing better, how to prevent future incidents, and how to rebuild trust between citizens and those sworn to protect them. Schools even organized small events where students talked about fairness, respect, and the importance of treating everyone with dignity. The case also caught the attention of national organizations focused on justice and accountability. Representatives traveled to the town, meeting with local leaders and offering support. Their presence reminded the community that this case was not just about one officer or one woman, it was about something larger, something that mattered to every citizen in the country. As the trial approached, anticipation filled the air. News vans parked near the courthouse. Reporters practiced their lines. Community members lined up early to find seats inside the courtroom, knowing space would be limited. There was a sense that history was being written in their town, and no one wanted to miss it. The woman spent the night before the trial quietly at home, reflecting on everything that had happened. She thought of the night it all began, of the fear she felt, and of the long weeks that followed. She thought of the people who believed in her and the strangers who supported her without even knowing her personally. For her, stepping into the courtroom was not just about her own story, it was about making sure no one else would go through what she had endured. The officer also spent the night before the trial in silence, knowing that the decisions of strangers, 12 jurors, would soon shape his future. He thought of the years he had served, the choices he had made, and the single night that now overshadowed it all. By the morning of the trial, the courthouse stood like a symbol. Its steps were filled with people holding signs that read "Justice Matters" and "Truth Above All." Inside, the wooden benches filled quickly, the atmosphere heavy with expectation. The judge took her seat, the lawyers stood ready, and the first day of the trial began. The stage was set for the truth to be tested. Evidence would be shown, words would be spoken, and the jury would have the difficult task of deciding what justice truly meant in this case. And so, the investigation had done its work. The charges were filed, the courtroom was ready, and both the officer and the woman now faced the moment that would define their lives forever. The courthouse became the center of attention for the whole town when the trial began. From the very first day, the hallways were filled with reporters carrying cameras, townspeople hoping to get a seat inside, and lawyers moving quickly with stacks of papers in their hands. The building, usually quiet and routine, now felt alive with tension and anticipation. Everyone knew this trial was not only about one man and one woman, it was about trust, fairness, and justice. On the first morning, the jury was selected. Ordinary citizens from different walks of life were chosen to sit in those important chairs. Each juror knew the responsibility was heavy. Their decision would not only affect the officer's future but also send a message to the community about what was right and what was wrong. They promised to listen carefully and judge only by the facts. The courtroom itself had a serious atmosphere. The judge, calm and firm, reminded everyone that the process must remain respectful. The woman sat quietly with her lawyer by her side, her hands folded, her eyes sometimes downcast. She knew she would have to speak soon, and the thought made her nervous. Across the room, the officer sat next to his attorney, his face steady but pale, as though the weight of the past months rested heavily on his shoulders. The prosecutor opened the case with strong words. He explained to the jury what they would see and hear in the coming days. He told them that the evidence was clear: a person who was already under control had been treated unfairly. He promised to show the video, to bring forward witnesses, and to let the truth speak for itself. His tone was respectful but firm, and the jurors nodded, listening closely. Then the defense lawyer stood. He spoke about the officer's years of service, the stress of the job, and the possibility of human error. He asked the jury not to judge too quickly, reminding them that people are complex and that one night should be seen in the context of an entire career. He urged them to keep open minds until all the evidence was presented. The first major moment of the trial came when the video footage was shown. The room went silent as the screen lit up. Jurors leaned forward, the woman looked down, and the officer stared blankly at the table in front of him. The video, though already seen by much of the public, carried a new weight inside the courtroom. It was no longer just an image online, it was now an official piece of evidence in the pursuit of justice. Gasps could be heard when the key moments appeared on screen. Even though many had already witnessed it, watching it in the solemn setting of a courtroom made it feel heavier, more real. The prosecutor pointed out specific details: highlighting how the woman had already been restrained and how no further action was necessary. He explained step by step how the officer's choices went beyond what his training allowed. Next came the witnesses. People who had been near the scene that night took the stand. Each one shared what they had seen and heard. Some spoke nervously, unused to being in a courtroom, but their sincerity was clear. They described their shock, their disbelief, and how quickly they reached for their phones to record what was happening. Their voices painted a picture that matched what the jury had already seen on the screen. Then came the woman's turn. She walked slowly to the witness stand, her steps measured. Taking a seat, she breathed deeply before beginning her testimony. She spoke in simple, honest words. She admitted to her own mistakes that night, explaining that she had been upset and had consumed alcohol. But she also described the moment she felt powerless, the fear that rose in her when she realized she had no control over what was happening. Her voice trembled at times, but she never lost her courage. Her testimony moved many in the room. Some jurors' expressions softened as they listened. Her honesty made it clear that she was not trying to hide her faults, she only wanted justice for the treatment she had endured. When her lawyer asked her how the incident had affected her life since, she paused, then said quietly, "I still feel it every day. It's not just about that night. It's about trust. It's about knowing it could happen again to someone else." The defense lawyer cross-examined her gently, trying to raise questions about her memory and state of mind that evening. But her steady responses showed that, despite her condition that night, she clearly remembered how she had felt and what had taken place. Her words carried weight, and the courtroom could feel it. Expert witnesses were also called. Police trainers and law enforcement specialists testified about proper procedures during an arrest. They explained that officers are trained to remain calm, to de-escalate situations, and to ensure that once a person is restrained, their safety becomes a priority. The experts emphasized how the actions shown in the video strayed far from these guidelines. Their testimony was professional, straightforward, and difficult for the defense to challenge. Throughout the trial, the officer sat quietly, rarely making eye contact with anyone. His lawyer argued passionately that stress and exhaustion had influenced his decisions, but the evidence painted a different picture. As the trial moved toward its end, the closing arguments began. The prosecutor stood once more, looking directly at the jury. He reminded them of the video, the witnesses, the expert testimony, and the woman's courage. He told them that the badge carries not only power but also responsibility, and when that responsibility is broken, accountability must follow. The defense lawyer, in turn, asked the jury to remember the officer's years of service. He spoke of the difficulty of policing, the pressure of late-night calls, and the possibility that in a moment of weakness, mistakes can happen. He asked them not to erase a man's entire career for one night. The jury listened carefully to both sides. Then, after days of testimony and hours of arguments, they were dismissed to deliberate. The courtroom emptied, leaving only a quiet hum of conversation outside the doors. People waited anxiously, wondering how long it would take and what decision would be reached. Inside the jury room, 12 ordinary people discussed the evidence. They replayed the video, reviewed the testimonies, and shared their personal reflections. Some admitted feeling torn, respecting the officer's past service but unable to ignore the clear evidence of wrongdoing. Others felt certain from the start that the law had been broken. Slowly, through hours of careful discussion, a decision began to form. Back in the courtroom, tension filled the air. Reporters tapped their pens, family members held hands, and the woman sat with her lawyer, staring quietly ahead. The officer kept his eyes low, waiting for the words that would decide his future. Finally, the jurors returned. One by one, they filed back into their seats, their faces serious and calm. The judge asked if they had reached a verdict. The foreperson stood, holding a folded piece of paper. The room went silent as the verdict was read aloud. It was a decision that would echo far beyond the walls of that courtroom. The courtroom was silent as the foreperson stood with the verdict in hand. Everyone inside held their breath. The woman looked down, her hands clasped tightly together, while the officer sat still, his lawyer by his side. Reporters leaned forward, their pens ready, waiting to write down the words that would shape the future of this case. The judge asked the foreperson to read the decision. The words echoed clearly, the jury had found the officer guilty. The room remained still for a few seconds, as though the air itself needed time to absorb the news. Then a quiet murmur spread through the audience, a mix of relief, surprise, and solemn understanding. The woman closed her eyes, a single tear slipping down her cheek. It was not a tear of victory, but of release. She had carried the weight of fear and uncertainty for many months, and now, finally, she felt that the truth had been recognized. Her lawyer placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, reminding her that she was not alone in this moment. Across the room, the officer sat motionless. His face was pale, his expression unreadable. For years he had worn the uniform, carrying authority and responsibility. Now he faced the reality that his choices had consequences, and those consequences would follow him into the future. The judge thanked the jury for their careful work and then announced that sentencing would take place in the coming weeks. The trial was over, but the story was not yet finished. The town, the woman, and the officer would all continue to feel the effects of this case for years to come. In the days after the verdict, conversations filled the community. People gathered in coffee shops, at kitchen tables, and on neighborhood sidewalks to discuss what had happened. Some felt a deep sense of relief. They believed justice had been served and that the verdict showed no one was above the law. Others felt sadness, not only for the woman but also for the officer, who had once been seen as a protector but now stood convicted. Local newspapers printed headlines about the case, highlighting the importance of accountability. National news outlets covered the verdict as well, framing it as part of a larger conversation about trust, fairness, and the responsibilities of those in uniform. The town, once quiet and largely unknown beyond its borders, was now part of a bigger story that reached across the country. For the woman, life slowly began to move forward. Though the trial had ended, the memories of that night stayed with her. She admitted to friends that she still struggled with moments of fear and sadness, but she also felt stronger knowing that she had spoken her truth and that people had listened. She hoped that her courage might help others who had faced unfair treatment to also find their voices. Community members reached out to her, offering kind words, support, and encouragement. Letters arrived at her door from strangers, some from nearby towns and others from far away, all saying that her story had touched them deeply. These gestures reminded her that even in moments of hardship, compassion could shine through. Meanwhile, the officer awaited his sentencing. For him, the days were heavy with reflection. He had once believed his role in the community gave him strength and respect. Now he realized that with respect came responsibility, and that failing to honor that responsibility carried serious consequences. His lawyer continued to speak of his years of service, hoping the judge would consider them during sentencing. But the evidence, the verdict, and the expectations of the community could not be undone. When the day of sentencing arrived, the courtroom filled again. People wanted to witness the conclusion of this long journey. The judge entered, her expression firm but calm. She acknowledged the seriousness of the case, reminding everyone that justice must be fair and equal for all. She addressed the officer directly. She spoke of the trust placed in him, the duty he had to protect others, and the ways in which his actions had broken that trust. She explained that the law did not allow for exceptions, even for those in uniform. Then she announced the sentence: the officer would serve time in prison. The words fell heavy in the room, yet they carried a sense of closure. The woman listened quietly, feeling a mixture of emotions. She did not celebrate, but she felt a deep sense of peace knowing the law had spoken clearly. The officer bowed his head, his shoulders slumping as the weight of the moment settled on him. After the sentencing, people outside the courthouse shared their thoughts. Some spoke of sadness that the story had ended this way, but most emphasized the importance of accountability. Parents told their children that justice means everyone must be treated equally, regardless of their position. Teachers used the case as a lesson about fairness and responsibility. Community leaders promised to work harder to build trust between citizens and law enforcement. The story did not end with punishment alone. It sparked conversations about change. Police departments in nearby towns began reviewing their training programs, focusing on compassion, patience, and the importance of de-escalation. Community groups formed partnerships with local officers, creating opportunities for dialogue, understanding, and cooperation. The incident had caused pain, but it also opened the door for growth and improvement. For the woman, healing continued step by step. She found comfort in her family, in the support of friends, and in the knowledge that her story had made a difference. She often said that she did not want to be remembered only as someone who suffered, but as someone who spoke up for fairness and dignity. For the officer, prison was a place of reflection. He had time to think about the choices he made, the trust he had lost, and the ways he could have acted differently. His story served as a reminder that authority must always be matched with responsibility, and that one moment of poor judgment can change a life forever. As time passed, the town slowly returned to its daily rhythms, but the memory of the case remained. People carried it with them as a lesson about trust, justice, and the importance of doing what is right even when it is difficult. In the end, the story became more than a single incident. It became a reminder for every community, that fairness must always guide action, that power must always be balanced with accountability, and that justice must serve all people equally. The woman moved forward with quiet strength, the officer faced the reality of his sentence, and the town, though tested, grew wiser. And though the events of that night would never be forgotten, the community carried with it the hope that the lessons learned would help shape a better future.